Must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 22nd of November. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Mark Dolan tonight is your weekend dose of news, debate and entertainment.
This sounds like a wild conspiracy theory.
Don't miss My Big Opinion. Mark meets at My Take at 10.
Democracy is a funny old thing.
And we don't do boring. Not on my watch. I just won't have it.
Let's go and get another glass of that bubbly. You've earned it.
That's Mark Dolan tonight, Saturday and Sunday, 9 to 11, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good evening, I'm Sophia Wensler with your headlines at 6 o'clock. The Prime Minister has hinted that the UK will start paying countries to do more to stop migrants entering the UK illegally. It comes amid reports the government is expected to announce an Italian-style immigration deal with countries like Kurdistan and Vietnam. The Times reported that the Home Secretary is preparing to pay millions of pounds to countries to fund more preventative measures, stopping migrants from journeying to Britain. Despite scrapping the Conservatives' flagship Rwanda plan, Labour is said to be modelling their immigration policy on that of Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni's deal with Albania. When asked directly about paying countries to stop migrants leaving their countries and heading to the UK, Sir Keir Starmer said anything else we can do to stop people leaving in the first place is the right thing. It comes as the Home Office confirmed that more than 400 illegal migrants crossed the Channel in small boats, as GB News first revealed yesterday. More than 33,500 illegal migrants have now crossed since the start of the year. That's already 4,000 more than the total number who crossed during the whole of 2023. An international manhunt is underway for the husband of a woman who was murdered and found in the boot of a car. 24-year-old Harshita Brella was discovered in London last Thursday after police received a call from a member of the public concerned for her welfare. Police are now searching for Harshita's husband, Pankaj Lamba, but he is thought to have fled the country. A mandatory referral has been made to the Independent Office for Police Conduct by Northamptonshire Police because of previous contact with Miss Brella. Now, it's being reported that ministers are drawing up contingency plans to deal with food shortages if farmers go on strike over the Treasury's inheritance tax raid on farms. Thousands of farmers from across the country are descending on London this week in objection to the government's plan to tax assets when farmers die. And £1 billion of extra funding for bus services has been announced by the government. Areas receiving an unprecedented amount of funding include Peterborough, the Isle of Wight and Torbay, with £712 million for councils and more than £200 million for operators. Those are the latest GB News headlines. More in an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Welcome to the Camilla Tominey Show with me, Tom Harwood, putting the Tom in Tominey. Yes, I'm standing in for Camilla, but coming up on today's show, Transport Secretary Louise Haigh will join me to discuss the government's £1 billion funding boost for bus services across England, although I'll also ask her some more juicy questions. Secretary of State, thank you very much for joining us this morning. I want to ask, first of all, on this news story that's broken overnight about the UK's migration policy. Could we really end up spending hundreds of millions of pounds and sending that to countries like Turkey, Vietnam, or indeed areas like Kurdistan to try and solve this problem?
Well, look, it's no secret that the Prime Minister and the Home Secretary have been working with our international counterparts across the globe to tackle this issue. This is not an issue that we can resolve at our own borders, but we need to work with international partners to tackle the issue upstream. That's why we've already made deals with Kosovo, with Serbia and North Macedonia, and it's already reaping results. We've returned 9,400 people in the last period, which is a 19% increase on the previous year. This is clearly the way to tackle the issue. And just last week, one of the biggest suppliers of small boat engines was arrested in the Netherlands and deported to Belgium. That's a direct consequence of the joint intelligence agreements and operations that we've been doing with other governments.
Of course, but amid all this, the numbers coming across on small boats are higher this year already, and the year's not even over, than the numbers were last year. I mean, surely there's got to be a bit of reconsideration now with regard to the Rwanda policy. One of the arguments that your government made about scrapping the Rwanda policy was that it cost hundreds of millions of pounds. And now this morning we're learning that your government is going to be spending hundreds of millions of pounds, but on a series of other countries.
Well, yes, the Rwanda scheme cost hundreds of millions of pounds and it returned 4 volunteers to Rwanda. It was completely ineffective, it wasted taxpayers' money and it didn't act as a deterrent. So we are committed to a long-term plan, working with international partners. It was up and running prior to the election. The previous government promised planes were going to be off the tarmac on multiple occasions, and only 4 volunteers were sent to Rwanda at a cost of hundreds of millions of pounds to the taxpayer. It was never anything more than a gimmick. We are committed to a long-term solution, working with international partners. It's why the Prime Minister was at Interpol, committed to public funding of operations, and why, as I say, it is already reaping consequences, with 19% increase on returns from last year.
Of course, during the election, the Prime Minister said the first scheduled flights were due to go off later in July. That, of course, never happened after the election result. But I do want to get on to buses this morning, because you've got a big announcement. £955 million for the bus network.
Absolutely. We're delighted to announce today almost £1 billion for local bus services. This will drastically improve reliability and services in every corner of the country. And for the first time, we are committing this funding in a fair, transparent way. The previous government took funding streams and they made areas compete against each other, with particularly rural areas losing out. Today, the funding settlement will give areas like Essex, Kent, Devon and areas across the north like Blackburn and Liverpool record sums of money to put into their bus services, which will increase reliability, improve real-time information and things like accessibility at bus stops and bus stations.
Of course, this extra money is coming at the same time that bus fares are going up. That £2 cap being raised to £3, a 50% increase for the cost that many people will be paying for their buses. Is this new announcement today just a sort of hurried PR exercise in order to sort of row back on those cuts that you made to buses?
No, you don't get £1 billion out of the budget as a hurried PR exercise. This is a really important balance between affordability of bus services and reliability. And the truth is that for too many parts of the country, they don't have reliable bus services. If you live in some rural towns or villages, you don't have a bus that turns up before 9 a.m. or after 5 p.m. And that's why the balance had to be struck between providing local areas with this kind of record settlement in order to expand and improve the reliability of services, because if you don't have a bus at all, it really doesn't matter how much the fare is, and that was the balance that had to be struck. So that's why we're providing record settlements, particularly to rural areas that have been so historically underserved by bus services.
Would it be fair to characterise the sort of political decision that's been made here as one that leads to slightly more expensive buses but more regular buses? Is that the bargain that you've made?
Well, the bus fare cap was due to end on the 31st of December. That was the funding settlement that I inherited. So we've stepped in to protect bus fares, and particularly bus fares in rural areas, because if I hadn't taken that action, then they would have jumped up to as much as £13, £14 in some instances. So capping it at £3 is a reasonable settlement. But crucially, the way that we've designed this fare cap means that not all fares will rise to £3. Operators will not be allowed to rise fares any more than inflation. So I would anticipate that a lot of urban fares, a lot of city centre and routes that cover cities will not rise to £3. So it is a fair settlement. It's keeping bus fares affordable, and it's improving the reliability and the number of services that will be available.
OK, I also want to get on to one of the biggest sort of transport, perhaps disasters, if that's not too strong a word, of the last decade or so. HS2. Where on earth are we with HS2? There seems to have been an awful lot of excited briefing one way or the other. Will there be trains going to Manchester after all?
So I was pretty horrified by the lack of ministerial oversight and the lack of government control of HS2 when I entered office. There had been no ministerial oversight at all, no ministerial task force. That was the first thing I did on entering office, was to set up joint work with the Treasury in order to try and bring the costs of HS2 back under control. And I set up an independent review in order to look at how we can bring costs under control of HS2 Limited, which has been to arm's length from government, despite the fact that it is only spending taxpayers' money. So that was first and foremost my priority, to try and get spending under control. The Chancellor announced at the budget that we would be delivering tunnelling to Euston, because of course this project would not make any sense if it only came to the outskirts of London. It had to come to central London. But that's our priority now, is delivering phase 1, which is Euston to Birmingham, and getting those costs under control. We are very clear that we'll be not resurrecting any further plans for HS2, and they will not be given any further scope beyond Birmingham.
When you say you're getting those costs under control, is HS2 still building a £100 million bat shed to protect 300 bats from a wood that they might happen to occasionally fly to?
Unfortunately, this spending decision was made by the previous government. It's another ridiculous example of where there was not enough accountability or oversight or political decision-making of HS2. They sat back and allowed HS2 to spend taxpayers' money completely with very little accountability over it. So that's absolutely part of the reason why we've set up this ministerial task force, and we're looking into the governance of HS2 to ensure that we can step in and stop spending like this happening in the future.
Of course, it's not just HS2 that's been staggered by these sort of peculiar environmental diktats to protect just 300 bats and spend £100 million doing so. Is there going to be a wider review of the impact of all of these environmental regulations, particularly the Legacy Habitats Directive that we are left with from the European Union? Is the government thinking about perhaps reforming some of these laws?
Look, it's quite clear that we've not got the balance right at the moment between doing what we need to protect the environment and nature, which is really important, and protecting taxpayers' money. So we are looking in a cross-government way at how we deliver infrastructure, including really important planning reforms and speeding up the way that the Environment Agency interacts with infrastructure. So that is being considered because, as you know, this is a perfect example of where clearly the previous government did not get the balance right at all and we're not treating taxpayers' money with the respect that it deserves.
There's another example of perhaps hundreds of millions of pounds being, I don't want to be so bold as to say wasted, but it's hard to use any other word when you look at the Lower Thames crossing. More than £300 million has been spent on the planning application alone for this proposed crossing of the Thames. That's more spent on the planning application than Norway spent actually building the longest tunnel in the world. And last month we learnt that we didn't get a final decision on the Lower Thames crossing. Your department delayed that decision again into next year. That's going to cost even more money. Why did you delay that?
Well, look, it's a quasi-judicial decision on the development consent order, so I'm not able to say anything further than what's already been placed on my written ministerial statement.
Can you comment on the £300 million plus that's been spent on the planning application alone without a single spade in the ground?
Well, without reference to the specific project, I can say that we are looking at widespread planning reform in order to speed up the decision-making process in the future and drive out some of those costs that have undermined the delivery of infrastructure in this country. It's widely held that UK infrastructure is more expensive than most of our international counterparts, and that is why we did a huge amount of work on this in opposition. I commissioned Jürgen Meyer, the former chief executive of Siemens, to do a huge piece of work for us, and that has informed a lot of our planning reform process and the decisions and actions that we've already taken in government in order to get infrastructure costs under control.
OK. Louise Haigh, Transport Secretary, thank you so much for joining us here on GB News this morning.
Thank you.
Headliners. Tomorrow's papers tonight. Every night from 11 p.m.
This is about pulchronomics, which is the often hidden, often controversial economics of beauty. And there's this guy, he's called, here it says, Anil Hammermesh, but I think they've missed out the D, so I'm guessing he's Daniel rather than Anil, which he might be, though. He might be or he might be anal for an Anil Hammermesh, maybe. That's his unfortunate name. But basically, he's looked into how ugliness affects people, and it turns out he's discovered that ugly people are less attractive. And that affects them for the rest of their life. Now, where this does get interesting, and it is worrying because, of course, it's going to lead to the ugly rights movement, ugly pride march down some dirty back street. And but I remember hearing about this at the time. People born in the UK between March 3rd and March 9th, 1958 were part of this massive survey that was done, which was finding about what would happen to them later in life, and it went through a number of different factors. But I didn't know this. The teachers were also asked to rate their pupils on attractiveness.
Yeah, it's a bit pedo-y.
But yeah, I mean, I don't know whether that would wash now, but it was bone structure and where they're symmetrical, that kind of thing.
You should probably really have a committee of at least half a dozen teachers. Take a sort of standardised view across the... You might get a different point of view from the biology teacher, from the Latin master.
You suggest this to a school, and then we can see if we get it going.
It's interesting, though. I don't know whether you're aware of this, but generally speaking, it is understood within sort of psychological, psychometrics and so on, that IQ is the thing that most closely maps your outcomes, generally speaking. But the idea of beauty is the one that isn't discussed. And there is genuinely a theory that this is actually the great determinant of your life chances.
GB News, the People's Channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Nightmare commute? Kick it up a gear with GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+ and on the GB News app. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player app. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with GB News Radio. We are the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show with me, Tom Harwood, standing in for Camilla this week. Now, we're talking about home affairs because there are a number of stories that are really related to home affairs that are dominating the newspapers this morning. Of course, the row over non-crime hate incidents continues to roll on, and a new Labour policy to try and stop the boats. Let's explore it all with the Shadow Home Secretary, Chris Philp. Chris, thanks so much for joining us this morning. I want to ask first on this bizarre and ongoing story about more and more public figures getting knocks on the door from the police. First, Alison Pearson, now Jermaine Greer, simply for holding, as far as I'm aware, legal opinions.
Yeah, well, good morning. I think it is ridiculous that public figures, journalists, but actually members of the public as well, are getting police attention for essentially expressing opinions. The police should concentrate on crime, genuine crime, not on policing thought. Now, I think if they are going to pay attention to anything that doesn't meet the criminal threshold, that should be an extremely high bar. It should be behaviour which is very likely to lead to imminent criminality, but they should not be policing thought.
But is this not an issue not just of the police, but also of the politicians? After all, it's MPs like yourself who passed the online safety bill, who didn't repeal the 2003 Communications Act, all of these different pieces of legislation that do make opinions that could be seen to be offensive practically illegal.
Well, first of all, the Online Safety Bill, or the Online Safety Act as it now is, was significantly amended, and it now deals with content that is harmful to children, and I'm sure all of us can agree that children should be protected, and it deals with behaviour online that is itself criminal, like organising drug supply or that kind of thing. The Online Safety Act no longer actually deals with adult behaviour falling below the criminal threshold. It was changed, I think, rightly to do that.
Shadow Home Secretary, we have seen many examples of the Communications Act 2003 leading people to face suspended prison sentences for off-colour jokes. We know the famous case of the Scottish man who taught his dog to do a Nazi salute, ended up being dragged through the courts. There was another example of someone who was very disparaging towards the memory of Sir Captain Tom Moore, and said some very awful things about him, but ended up getting a suspended sentence. I mean, these are thought crimes, are they not?
Well, I think you're raising a reasonable point. We should be very careful about where the line is drawn for the criminal law, and these are questions I think that we should take a look at. We should not have the police policing thought crime, and things should only be illegal where they cause demonstrable harm, like serious harm to others. I'm concerned about the non-crime hate incident category, and in fact, when I was police minister, I actually tightened the rules quite considerably just a few months ago, and had plans to tighten them a lot further. And I'm very concerned to hear that Yvette Cooper, the new Home Secretary, is planning or is thinking about scrapping the changes that we introduced a few months ago that effectively raised the threshold for those non-crime hate incidents. Because you're quite right, people, journalists in particular, but the public as well, should not be getting visits from the police in relation to expressing opinions. And sometimes those opinions might be offensive, but we need to be very careful where that criminal line is drawn. And the police, as I say, should be concentrating on acts that are criminal, or if they're not criminal, then very close to the criminal threshold. And there should be, a realistic and immediate chance of criminal behaviour following before the police take action. That is a very high threshold. And in some cases, like the case of, I think it was Julie Bindel, who was approached by the police for commenting on trans issues, in my view, that threshold wasn't met.
It is, of course, the College of Policing that came up with the idea for these so-called non-crime hate incidents back in 2014. It wasn't politicians who legislated for it. Do you think that the College of Policing should be sort of creating new categories of investigation like this and these rather Orwellian-sounding blots to go on many people's files?
Well, I think we need to look at this whole, Parliament needs to look at this whole issue again and to take control of it, essentially, because it is important. It is infringing on the rights of free citizens and journalists, and we need to make sure the line is drawn in the right place. I think that is something that Parliament should be looking at itself, and we do need to look at moving, I think, where that line is drawn.
That's interesting because, of course, the default answer from many politicians is the police are operationally independent in all of these matters. Do you think there should be some more, perhaps, political control?
Well, of course, not of day-to-day operational matters, no. So when we talk about operational independence, what we mean is that Parliament, acting for the public, set the laws, we set the legislative framework, and then the police apply those laws and act within that framework. That's what operational independence means. And if there are elements of the framework, the laws, the principles, that need to be looked at again, it is perfectly proper, I think, for Parliament to look at that. It is then up to the police to apply that in practice according to their own judgment, and that is what operational independence means.
That's very clear. Now, moving on to small boat arrivals, of course, the government has yet another new plan in terms of trying to stop those boats. It's no longer just smashing the gangs, it's also giving millions of pounds to countries like Vietnam or Turkey to try and stop the flow upstream. Do you think it will work?
Well, look, I mean, I'm happy to look at any constructive proposal, but no, I don't think it will work because ultimately you need a deterrent. I mean, the National Crime Agency have said you need a deterrent. Martin Hewitt, the government's new border czar, has said you need a deterrent as well. And we had one. We had the Rwanda scheme, but the Labour government scrapped it before it had even started. The first flight was due to take off on the 24th of July, I think, and they scrapped it before it even took off. And because we now have no deterrent, small boat crossings under this Labour government have actually gone up. Now, I believe, had we implemented the deterrent, so if people had crossed the channel, they would rapidly be removed, in this case to Rwanda, but it doesn't really matter where, then that deterrent would have stopped people even attempting the crossings. And I'm not speculating. I know that would have worked. Wait a second, I know that would have worked. No, well, I'm about to say it. No, I don't think it is, because we've seen it work
because we've seen we've seen Georgia Maloney get struck down by the courts only last week. I mean, there is a conspiracy theory that perhaps has a bit of credibility lending to it, that one of the reasons the Prime Minister went so early in that disastrous general election was because he didn't want the embarrassment of yet again courts stopping flights from going to Rwanda.
Yeah, so there's two questions there. Firstly, I think in substance the scheme would have worked in practice because we saw it work in Australia, where they had a similar problem about 10 years ago, and Australia's Operation Sovereign Borders included a deterrent removal scheme. In their case, it was to an island called Nauru. And when we had a returns agreement with Albania, so when people crossed the channel and they got sent quickly back to Albania, we saw the number of crossings go down by 93%. So I think in substance we know a deterrent works. Now, you asked a different question, which is would the courts have stopped it? And, I think we passed the Safety of Rwanda Act, which, for example, gave ministers the power to ignore one of these so-called Rule 39 judgments from Strasbourg, which the interim order which they used in the past, ministers would have had the power to do that. So I think the Rwanda bill could have been probably strengthened a bit, but I think it would have had a very good chance of being effective. And I think if we get back into government, I think one of the components of our plan, not the only component, but one of the components of our plan will be a removal deterrent scheme, because we have seen it work elsewhere. And you know what? Even the European Commission are thinking about it. Ursula von der Leyen, even, the Commission President, was urging member states, European Union member states, to do offshore processing outside the European Union. So even the European Union are looking at doing it. It's just a Labour government here that are too scared to.
OK, well, Chris Philp, Shadow Home Secretary, thank you very much for joining us here on the Camilla Tominey Show. Delighted to be joined by the Conservative Member of Parliament for North West Hampshire, Kit Malthouse. Kit, thank you so much for joining us on the show this morning. You, of course, have been a proponent of what's known as assisted dying. Some people who oppose it call it assisted suicide. It's become a more and more contentious issue the closer to a vote the House of Commons has got. Why are you supporting this particular bill?
Well, Tom, over the last 10 years, I've been campaigning broadly on and off in between being a minister for assisted dying, because it became clear to me many years ago that there were some people who at their end of their lives, medicine just couldn't help. And as a result, we were consigning them to agonizing, painful and degrading deaths when that could be avoided. And when we looked around the world at other models, like in Oregon or in Australia, I could see that there was a better option that might be available to them. And I became more and more dissatisfied with the status quo that we have at the moment, where we've got about one person a week going business class to Switzerland, to Dignitas, to take their lives, but something like 650 odd people a year who are committing suicide in horrible, violent ways because they just can't face the agony that awaits them at the end of their life. Now, rather than have this horrendous kind of unregulated Wild West, it seems sensible to me for some time that government should intervene. There should be some regulation and control over this. And that's why I've been supporting the bill for the last 10 years or so.
Of course, there are some particular concerns about this particular private member's bill that has been brought forward, not the same level of scrutiny that a government bill would have in the House of Commons, and some real concerns over those safeguards that exist within it. The fact that only 2 doctors are required and you can keep going through and looking for different doctors until you get the right answer.
Well, I don't think that's entirely fair, Tom. I mean, the bill will go through exactly the same process that government bills go through, and in fact, in many ways, may get more scrutiny. It has to go through both houses of Parliament and may have to ping-pong between the two before it goes forward. And MPs have several points at which they can vote for or against. It's worth also bearing in mind that the debate takes place in places other than in the chamber. So both sides of the debate are holding extensive meetings in Parliament with experts from around the world and from particular fields to talk about and debate these issues. We had some, for example, on Wednesday night, we had some medics from Australia and California talking about their experience of it, that MPs can gather the information that they need to make that kind of decision. And in terms of the safeguards, the bill that Kim Leadbeater, that I'm supporting, that she's drawn, has the strongest safeguards you can have pretty much you can find anywhere in the world. I mean, 2 doctors having to agree that you're within 6 months at the end of your life, that you have a settled will to proceed, that you're not being coerced, and then a High Court judge effectively signing off at the end, having questioned those doctors and indeed having the power to question you and others before you personally get the choice to decide whether you proceed with it. And to me, for somebody who's facing a horrible, agonizing death, this is a profoundly important option that we need to give them, so they, rather than disease, controls how they die.
And yet, is there not an issue with this shopping around for doctors' clause? The fact that a doctor may well not agree with your request to end your own life, and then you can simply disregard that doctor and find another one. Is that not a bit of a flaw in the plan?
No, because you need 2 doctors. It's not that the doctor doesn't agree. Where you can seek another doctor is that if the doctor declines to participate. So if the doctor conscientiously objects, and there should be get-outs in the clause for them to object, that is different from them saying, no, I think you have 12 or 24 months to live. Critically also, though, doctors are allowed to consult other specialists who might have greater knowledge of the particular disease from which you're suffering, or indeed a psychiatrist or a psychologist to assess your capacity. So there are very strong medical safeguards in there as well. And don't forget that a judge will preside over the whole thing. So a judge is able to assess whether there is a settled will and how the doctors have performed, and has to, by law, question at least one of the doctors about the process. Now, when somebody is facing, a horrible death, if you suffer from motor neuron disease, sadly, you know that you're going to effectively choke to death at the end of your life. Having these safeguards is important, but we have to balance that against the need for that person to have that choice, to control the manner of their death and overcome this appalling disease, if you like, that is going to kill them in a horrible way. Now, that has to be done within a respectable period of time. We think 6 months is about right. And we know from around the world that where this has been introduced in places that follow the same model that we're following, terminally ill adults within 6 months, that it is profoundly successful. And over time, the medical profession actually come to welcome it.
Of course, you have mentioned California, you've mentioned Australia. The one territory you haven't mentioned is Canada, where I think a lot of people assess it has gone perhaps further than many would have liked, that there has been this sort of thin end of the wedge leading to a thicker end of the wedge, that people can be seen to be near the end of life if they have, for example, suicidal thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, Canada doesn't follow the same model as us, and they have a different legal system. So they've got a thing called the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which is like a sort of constitution, which has been used to kind of expand the law. But just because a certain territory does it in one way doesn't mean we shouldn't do it in our own way. So, for example, I think it's still the case that abortion is legal in Canada well beyond the time limits that we impose. I think almost actually legal up till the point of birth. That doesn't mean to say we shouldn't have abortion in this country. And I think given that we're a 1,000-year-old democracy, you know, we should be able to design a law which satisfies our own cultural sensitivities and requirements and gives those people that choice.
Good evening, welcome to your latest GB News weather from the Met Office. So it's going to be turning colder for all of us as we head into the new working week, with some sleet and snow in the forecast for some of us and plenty of blustery showers around as well. This is all thanks to this area of low pressure that's moving in from the northwest towards the UK as we go through into the start of Monday and Tuesday. Back to this evening though, a bit of a mixed picture across the UK, plenty of cloud, some outbreaks of rain sinking their way south and eastwards across the southern half of the UK, but further north staying a little bit drier, plenty of clear spells around, some blustery showers across the far north of Scotland, these likely to turn to sleet and snow over the hills, and it'll be a really chilly start to the morning across parts of Scotland, perhaps as low as -4 or -5 in places. So this could mean some icy stretches, so do take care during Monday morning's rush hour. But further south, a bit of a milder start to the morning, plenty of showery rain around, this perhaps turning heavy across southwestern parts of England. For Northern Ireland, northern parts of England, generally a bit of a drier start to the day though, some sunny spells as we go through the morning. But for Scotland, despite the bright start, it will be a really chilly start, so do take care if you are on the roads during Monday morning's rush hour, as there could be some ice on some untreated surfaces. Those sleet and snow showers continue to pile in across northern parts of Scotland throughout all of Monday, and that initial area of rain across the southern areas clears away to the south, but this next area of rain arrives across parts of Northern Ireland, most likely falling as rain, but we could see some sleet and snow over the hills as we go through Monday afternoon. Some sunny spells across eastern areas through the afternoon, but feeling really quite chilly here. Temperatures only around 2 or 3 degrees, but just holding on to that milder air further south. To start on Tuesday, we could see some disruptive snow across northern parts of England, most likely falling over high ground, but there is a chance that we could see sleet and snow to lower levels, so do take care if you are out on Tuesday morning. But Tuesday afternoon, there should be plenty of sunny spells around, but still plenty of blustery showers, particularly across the northern half of the UK, and it will be feeling cooler as we go towards the middle part of the week, with temperatures well below average for the time of year.
Mark Dolan tonight is your weekend dose of news, debate and entertainment.
This sounds like a wild conspiracy theory.
Don't miss My Big Opinion, Mark Meets, and My Take at 10.
Democracy is a funny old thing.
And we don't do boring, not on my watch. I just won't have it.
Let's go and get another glass of that bubbly. You've earned it.
That's Mark Dolan tonight, Saturday and Sunday, 9 to 11, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christys tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there short and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christys tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now, with me is the award-winning journalist and broadcaster, Hadley Gamble. Now, Hadley, you are in the rare position of having interviewed Vladimir Putin, looked him in the eyes, and got a sense of who he is as a human being. I want to start there.
Yeah.
Is he mad?
Absolutely
is he
not.
bad? Or is he just something that we haven't quite figured out in the West?
Well, we've had 20 years to figure out this gentleman, and we have consistently failed to do so. And I think that what you're seeing now is a continuing of failed policies, not just by the White House and various administrations, but also by European leaders. And today, we're looking at a situation where Europe can't afford to defend Ukraine, and the United States is no longer going to do so under a Trump presidency. So things are moving very quickly. I think for the EU, I mean, if you pursue consistently over years politics and policies of economic suicide, this is the situation that you find yourself in. You can't project your foreign policy in the ways that you would like to. And I think that perhaps we sold President Zelensky and the Ukrainians a raw deal in making them think that we were going to be able to fund this conflict and to fund this war, forever and ever and ever until they got their goals met, whatever those goals may be, because I think that the goalposts have changed quite a bit. And now we're in a situation where obviously the president-elect has said multiple times, I want to put an end to this war as quickly as possible. How he's going to do that remains a bit fuzzy. But for the Ukrainians, it would seem that it would behoove them to get to the table as quickly as possible. And I say that because no doubt they're going to get a better deal while Joe Biden is still in the White House.
Right.
And whoever is running the United States is still running it. That's open for debate. But they're going to get a better deal and a better Marshall Plan, if you will, for that country if they move quickly.
Do you think that there's this almost sort of rush from both sides now to sort of try and fix the position to make it most favourable before the 21st of January when Donald Trump is inaugurated?
Yeah.
Are we perhaps going to see one of the bloodiest periods in this war as both sides scramble for the last-minute upper hand?
Take the step back and think about what both sides want to achieve here. We know the goals of the Ukrainians: keep as much of their land as possible and keep as much autonomy as possible. But for Vladimir Putin, much of this is about saving face. And I think Henry Kissinger actually pointed that out in the early days of the conflict, which is we've got to figure out a way for them to get out in such a way that he saves face and also that, frankly, the global economy can get back on track. And I say that with regards to Europe, as we know, we have anemic growth. And then in Russia, quite the contrary. You have the fastest growing of advanced economies is the Russian economy.
Although the ruble is declining and declining and declining in terms of its value.
Indeed, but at the same time, this is a man who was able to turn things around in 2 short years, whereas the West has been consistently putting on these economic sanctions that if you cover energy, which I do, you could have told them in the very beginning, these are not going to work, they're not going to be effective. There's even a conflict right now in Azerbaijan talking about, Russian gas and sort of the pushback from European nations about the fact that they still require Russian gas.
Yeah, and one of the remarkable stories that perhaps is not reported on enough is the German story of the last decade or so.
The sick man of Europe.
The entire German economy, built on energy-intensive manufacturing, was built on this model of importing cheap gas and oil from
Greed
Russia.
and hubris.
Right? And then suddenly that does not become cheap anymore. That gets rather expensive and sanctioned and all the rest of it. And the German economy has spent most of the last 2 years in recession. You've interviewed Olaf Scholz, the Chancellor of Germany, who might not be the Chancellor of Germany for much longer, given the collapse of his government.
Exactly.
What do you make out of how Germany in particular has handled these peculiar last 3 years?
It's been fascinating to watch, to be honest, because the last time I interviewed Olaf Scholz was in February of this year. Already the German economy was shrinking. They were going to have a really, really bad year, and I think only beaten by France in terms of their economic growth or lack thereof. And this was a man that was in seemingly total denial of how bad it was. But they are the sick man of Europe. The question going forward is going to be how they get their economy back on track without going back to nuclear, trying to source these other forms of energy. They're obviously looking to the United States. They're looking to Qatar as well.
Do you think there's no chance they'll reopen their nuclear power stations? Because one of the bizarre points in this story that we haven't yet landed on is the fact that the year before the world went into an energy crisis, the Germans decided to turn off the most powerful, cleanest, greenest form of energy that is known to man. They switched off their nuclear power stations just as they were heading in to a energy crisis. I mean, what a choice is that?
Well, this is a country, of course, that, you know, on the surface, they'll say again and again, no, we're not going back to nuclear. But at the same point, this was the engine of European growth. This was the country that was leading Europe. The policies pursued by Angela Merkel, obviously, highly questionable in hindsight. And even at the time, President-elect Trump, at that time, as president, questioned repeatedly what they were doing and why they were doing it. And aren't you just playing right into Vladimir Putin's hands? And of course they were. But at the same point, you know, this is a country that needs to get back on track. There's already more right-wing pushback than I think that anyone would like to see. And that obviously is economic. So they're going to have to really have a hard think about, you know, the green policies that they've been pursuing, whether those have been effective. We've seen that they unfortunately conflict with, you know, the industrial policies that they want to pursue, and whether what, you know, has made sense in the last few years can continue to make sense for them.
Germany had, of course, been dragging its feet on sanctions on Russia because of their particular economic model, I suppose. Now, with this call between Olaf Scholz and Vladimir Putin, could we start to see Germany being the first crack in that sanctions wall? I mean, we've seen Volodymyr Zelensky, Boris Johnson really criticise this call. Yeah, I mean, I think that this is just a realisation that the party is over. And I mean that in the sense that the Americans are not going to continue to fund Europe's defence. Olaf Scholz understands that. And I think that you're going to consistently see over the next several weeks, couple of months, movement from Europe to this realization, you know, they can't afford it. The policies have not worked, and they're going to have to come some kind of a deal here. And I think for Zelensky in particular, and for the Ukrainians, I mean, these are the people that are really hurting. They're the ones that have been on the front lines. They are the ones who deserve some kind of Marshall Plan, some kind of future. They deserve their energy protected. They deserve the billions of dollars in investment that will be unlocked potentially as soon as this war ends. I mean, we have BlackRock and JP Morgan already saying they want to put billions into this country in terms of energy infrastructure, general infrastructure, agriculture, IT. I mean, there's a lot of money to be made. So if you're a financial journalist, as I am, you look at this from the perspective of how quickly can they put an end to this conflict and how quickly can they get people back on their feet? And I think that leads to the bigger question of who will then be running Ukraine. Will it be a wartime leader like Vladimir Zelensky? And obviously, this is very Churchillian in that sense, right? Post-war England was not too keen on keeping this man around. So we'll see. It will be absolutely fascinating. But just finally, do you think we're going to see a substantial loss of territory for Ukraine? Could we see basically the battle lines as they've been frozen for the last year and a half? Will that be the shape of the new Ukraine?
It's all about how quickly they decide to cut a deal and who's in the driver's seat. You know, there are a lot of questions about whether or not they should have been pushing for that peace deal prior to the U.S. election. I think, you know, in hindsight, we know many things, but the feeling on the ground in the United States, particularly with the Republicans in Congress, was not Ukraine. It was more about U.S. tax dollars going to something that there was no end in sight. And I think that, unfortunately, between the Europeans, between the government in Kyiv, and obviously the Biden administration, they were not very helpful in allowing this conflict to be protracted because it means they have less leverage.
OK. Well, award-winning journalist Hadley Gamble, thank you so much for joining us here on the Camilla Tominey Show.
Sunday with Michael Portillo from 11, only on GB News.
On the 8th of October at Battersea Arts Centre, a new orchestra launched its inaugural season. The orchestra, which is named Chromatica, is formed of some of the best young musicians in Britain. They're due to perform in traditional venues and in community spaces. The aim is to bring their youth and dynamism to a wide repertoire of music. Predominantly, they'll work with emerging conductors who will have the chance to shape the orchestra and its repertoire. To share her experiences of bringing the ensemble together, I'm joined by the violinist and Chromatica Orchestra lead, Maren Bosma. To what extent is this novel? To what extent is this new ground?
Well, new ground, it is new ground in a sense that this is a completely new orchestra. Obviously, in the current sort of cultural climate, it's not really easy to set up a new orchestra. And so in that sense, it's a novelty for us to kind of try and carve out our space in the current climate of musical orchestras and musicians in Britain.
Yes, I mean, it's quite odd in a way to think of a new orchestra because the ones that we have tend to be struggling and numbers indeed have been reduced. I used to be associated with an orchestra which unfortunately went under. You've got some private backing for this.
Yeah.
Why do you think the private backers have been willing to give you support? What is it that they see as your unique selling proposition?
Well, Chromatica Orchestra essentially is an early career orchestra. So we're formed of all sort of top musicians who've graduated in, say, the last sort of 5 to 10 years. Because everyone is of that generation, there is a sort of enthusiasm and dynamism that we bring to the stage I think is quite unique. The orchestra's mission, it's really focused on creating opportunities for young emerging musicians.
GB News, the People's Channel.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop star to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Nightmare commute? Kick it up a gear with GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+ and on the GB News app. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player app. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with GB News Radio. We are the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now, the National Farmers Union has organised a mass lobby event for Tuesday in response to the government's decision to change inheritance tax relief for farmers, what's been branded the family farm tax. It comes as yesterday farmers in Wales protested outside the Welsh Labour Conference. So with me now, live from his farm, is Douglas Turner, a farmer himself. And Douglas, I gather that you are reflecting a real feeling of horror, potentially, that many family farms could well cease to be within the next generation.
Absolutely, Tom. What's happened, why the government have probably brought this in, is because of all the corporates that have bought farms and tried to use the inheritance tax aspect of it. But for farmers themselves, we do need to be able to pass farms on generation onto generation because it's our workplace. We have so much trouble at the moment with net zero, with the nut zero people. They want to get rid of the CO2. They have no idea how long, how many hours we work and to make food. And then at the end of the day, they want to slap on an inheritance tax, which if they're going to have it, the threshold needs to go up higher. It needs to be about 10 million or something like that, because there are so many farms that are within the £1 million. I'm sorry if the camera keeps moving, but as you can see behind me, I've got a few sheep around me at the moment that keep pushing me around.
I think well, no, it's wonderful atmosphere. But Douglas, I suppose this shows how farming is not a 9 to 5 Monday to Friday job. You're out there amongst your sheep on Sunday morning.
Absolutely. We work 7 days a week, normally 7 to 10 hours minimum, quite often 12 hours. We had some people recently wanted to come and work part-time because they said about, the civil servants to do a 4-day week. We said, that's fine, you can do a 4-day week, but you're looking about 60 to 80 hours. And they said, how can that be so? I said, well, we've just finished the harvest. And with the harvest, we are doing, 10 hours a day easy because we have to feed the population. What the population don't seem to think, and also this is along with the inheritance tax, when people say that we get subsidies and benefits, food is too cheap all the time. If food was the price that it actually cost us and the time that we put in to make it happen, it would be far more expensive. So we get the subsidies, yes. We actually had the inheritance tax assistance as well, but that's been abused by a lot of people, and this is why possibly that they bought it in. But that with the nut zero people, the CO2, and don't forget, Tom, CO2 makes things grow all the time as well.
Of course, there is a view. It's been articulated by some commentators. John McTernan, the former advisor to Tony Blair, said on this television channel that perhaps we could do without family farms in the United Kingdom. And if we're to follow that logic, there might well be many people, perhaps in the Treasury, who would say that actually there are other countries that have much larger farms, much more efficient farms. And the UK is perhaps more of an outlier with the small family-run farms that perhaps make food more expensively than these mega corporate farms that you see in some other countries. Do they have a point?
No, not at all. The mega farms then will have more control over the price and the cost of everything, and they will then increase it. What we will have, you've got all the tick boxers that think that we should do this, that and the other. Oh, we're going to be green, we're going to be that. I think a lot of the green from the Labour is the green of envy, not anything else. How can you have people that have never farmed, want to take control of things, grow things in factories? We can't be having that at all. We've got to actually have it with the small family farms. Otherwise, we've lost control of that. And then if you've got the big corporates, they'll be dictating to us what we're going to have to eat, when we're going to be able to eat it. And if we don't have a good harvest, which sometimes we don't, it's flown in from another country. But we've ticked the box that we didn't do it here, but it's coming from there. The quality of the products, especially with the livestock, the paperwork that we have to
Douglas,
go
we don't have much time. I do just want to get in one more question, if we can, which is, I've seen lots of reports about lots of different protests that might take place. What sort of protests can we expect next week from farmers?
Well, I think it can be as good as it can be. I don't think we're going to go down the French route, because if we do that and we start putting compost and different things all over the place, that we're going down like the Just Stop Oiks. That's not the way to go. People are supporting us. They've got to go to their local farm shop and to buy the produce from us. Go to your local farm if you can do, but always support British farming.
Tremendous message. Douglas Turner, thank you so much for joining us live from your farm amongst your sheep. It's been a delight to sort of get that rural insight.
Heavy showers first thing will be followed by a warm, cosy day. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good evening. Welcome to your latest GB News weather from the Met Office. So it's going to be turning colder for all of us as we head into the new working week, with some sleet and snow in the forecast for some of us, and plenty of blustery showers around as well. This is all thanks to this area of low pressure that's moving in from the northwest towards the UK as we go through into the start of Monday and Tuesday. Back to this evening though, a bit of a mixed picture across the UK. Plenty of cloud, some outbreaks of rain sinking their way south and eastwards across the southern half of the UK, but further north staying a little bit drier. Plenty of clear spells around, some blustery showers across the far north of Scotland. These likely to turn to sleet and snow over the hills, and it'll be a really chilly start to the morning across parts of Scotland, perhaps as low as -4 or -5 in places. So this could mean some icy stretches, so do take care during Monday morning's rush hour. But further south, a bit of a milder start to the morning, plenty of showery rain around, this perhaps turning heavy across southwestern parts of England. For Northern Ireland, northern parts of England, generally a bit of a drier start to the day though, some sunny spells as we go through the morning. But for Scotland, despite the bright start, it will be a really chilly start, so do take care if you are on the roads during Monday morning's rush hours. There could be some ice on some untreated surfaces. Those sleet and snow showers continue to pile in across northern parts of Scotland throughout all of Monday, and that initial area of rain across the southern areas clears away to the south, but this next area of rain arrives across parts of Northern Ireland, most likely falling as rain. But we could see some sleet and snow over the hills as we go through Monday afternoon. Some sunny spells across eastern areas through the afternoon, but feeling really quite chilly here. Temperatures only around 2 or 3 degrees, but just holding on to that milder air further south. To start on Tuesday, we could see some disruptive snow across northern parts of England, most likely falling over high ground, but there is a chance that we could see sleet and snow to lower levels, so do take care if you are out on Tuesday morning. But Tuesday afternoon, there should be plenty of sunny spells around, but still plenty of blustery showers, particularly across the northern half of the UK, and it will be feeling cooler as we go towards the middle part of the week, with temperatures well below average for the time of year.
Expect a warm front, moving from the kitchen right through to the rest of the house. Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
This is the final week to grab your chance to win Christmas on Us this year. There's £20,025 in tax-free cash. There's £5,000 to spend on gifts for all the family. There's £500 to spend in your favourite supermarket. And a festively themed GB News goodie bag. We'll get it all to you in time for the big day. For another chance to win, call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge. Text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2, or post your name and number to GB09 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 22nd of November. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Why go out on a Friday night when Friday night comes straight to your home?
Talking about.
Join me and my A-team of top pundits.